Welcome to Recovery Comes Home Radio, your go-to podcast for all things related to addiction recovery. Whether you are an individual in recovery, a concerned loved one, or a dedicated professional, this podcast is tailored just for you. Here we are all about empowering you with the tools, insights, and inspiration you need to move forward. So grab your headphones, tune in, and let's embark on this transformative journey together. Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Recovery Comes Home Radio, the podcast where we are all about reconciliation of the family and reunification into the community. Today, I just can't wait to introduce you to Sarah Williamson. She is in recovery herself, but also a recovery professional. And we are really excited to have you on the show and to tell us a little bit about your experience.
Lovely. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I think we can help a lot of people here today, Sarah. So tell me, go back and tell me a little bit about your story, about, where you were and what happened and what it's like now for you.
Yeah. I'm 45 now. I had what I would term as a pretty average British experience of alcohol as a teenager and in my early 20s. So in the UK, it's legal to drink from 18. When I was in my mid-teens, it was really quite a rural area that I grew up in. And actually, there wasn't a lot for young people to do. Mm-hmm. And it did result in hanging out, getting hold of alcohol by any means, being in parks, being around each other's houses and seeing what we could get away with. I had one of my first jobs was in a pub when I was 16, mm-hmm. and we were very much all of the staff socialised together, and that was always around alcohol. I left home at 17 and went to university at 18, and our university culture is incredibly boozy right mm-hmm. from the get-go. The whole socialising, I would say that at that point in the UK, we were very tied up in the social aspect of university, almost being more important than the educational aspect.
Absolutely.
And in the UK in the 90s, there was this culture that at the time we called it the ladette culture. And it was where women were starting to claim their place alongside men as far as drinking was concerned. And so there would be this whole thing of the girls keeping up with the boys on nights out. Now, you can't see the size of me, but I am small. I'm 5 foot, I'm 150 centimetres, and I lived with 4 men at university. And so it was a constant trying to keep, I say trying to, I also mean failing to keep up with them from a drinking point of view. Through my university years and then starting work, I worked in central London, pretty much mm-hmm. straight out of university. And there was a huge social scene at that point. So my work through my 20s was it was a very sociable job anyway, but I don't think I ever considered the opportunity to be on work nights out and not have a drink. It was just, what was it expected? Mm-hmm. It was part of the deal. The only times I didn't drink, I would give myself small breaks from drinking, and I would tell my friends that I had either some sort of infection or something that needed treating with antibiotics, because it felt like it was so socially unacceptable to say, no, it's okay, thank you, I'm not going to drink for the time being. It felt like it needed an excuse.
Yeah, so you had to hide the real reason.
Yeah, yes.
From everyone.
Yeah, certainly, if I'd have been at home, I could have used the excuse that I was driving, for example, and I wouldn't have drunk if I was driving. But when we were out in central London, the transport home was always a train or a tube, so you couldn't use that kind of excuse. And it never felt satisfactory to say, I just don't want to. I'm just I'm fine, thanks. So as I was kind of heading into my mid-20s, I had was definitely getting to the point where all of that was wearing a bit thin, and I was looking for a bit more depth and meaning in my life. I met my now husband. We moved out of London a bit, and I got a job in the county where I now live, and definitely that kind of socializing shifted massively, and my drinking became much more of a weekend activity than an everyday activity. I still definitely drank too much when I was drinking,
Right.
but it was a different, I suppose, just a different pattern, a different feel. I remember when I changed my drinking to weekend drinking, and it was because my husband said to me one day, you come in from work and you head to the fridge before you've even taken your coat off. Had you realised that?
Wow.
And I said, no, I had not realised that. And he was absolutely right. It was my first activity in through the door was to pour a glass of wine. And in that moment, that was the first time where I thought, yes, this absolutely probably isn't normal behaviour. I knew that it was almost certainly attached to feelings of overwhelm. You know, I was working a busy job. I was in that phase of my life where it felt I was on a bit of a hamster wheel a lot
Oh
of the
yeah.
time. And the white wine at that time, it just, I thought it was helping me step off of that hamster wheel of an evening at the
Maybe
weekend.
you thought it was giving you a reprieve or a break from the pressures of ordinary life.
Yeah, but yeah, I definitely saw it like that. And when we were expecting my first child, my son, I was able to stop drinking immediately. And I had absolutely no worries or thoughts about the best thing for me being pregnant was to not drink at all and breastfeeding. And then I had my second son really quite quickly after my first son. So I had this really long period of not drinking and never giving it a moment's thought. I think I was able to just say, okay, this isn't about me. This is
Right.
about somebody
It's your
else more
life.
important in my life. Yeah. And so I feel very fortunate. You know,
Good
I
for
know
you with
that is
that.
not
Yes.
everybody's story. And once I had stopped feeding my second son, I guess I went back to drinking um, in again a different pattern. So one whereby it wasn't an everyday type of drinking at that point, but it went back to being a taking the edge off drinking that was more likely on weekends. So by the time I knew that I wanted things to be different, I would have been about probably into my late 30s. And I suddenly had this realization that so much of my parenting was modeling behavior for my kids. And I
Wow.
really recognized that I could tell my boys anything I liked, and they may or may not listen to the things I had to say. But I saw that I was showing my children with my actions that the way to deal with life was to drink and move my state, my way of being, by drinking alcohol. And I had this thought to myself that one day I was going to be a really disappointed parent if I saw my kids repeating my behavior when it
Yeah.
was only me who had shown them that
That
behavior.
behavior. Yes. Yes.
Yep. And that was what brought me to the point of knowing that I wanted things to be different. And my journey from making that choice to actually being satisfied about my different, feeling totally aligned with who I am, was probably a 5-year period.
Wow.
So for the 2.5 years, I cut down my drinking over time. I reduced the amount of drinking I was doing. I would say, it was harm reduction. I was starting to feel more comfortable about being on nights out socializing and not drinking, about who I did share the bits of my story with, who I didn't want to share bits of my story with, who I could trust, and where I went through massive feelings of being really vulnerable, feeling huge shame, massive guilt, and very exposed with those feelings as well, because I hadn't found at that point a safe set of ears where I could land some of this information. So it was 2019 that I decided I would do a social experiment on myself. And I thought, right, I'm going to do 1 year. I'm going to go the whole of 2020 without an alcoholic drink and see how it feels. And if I end up having the worst year of my life, then I'll probably just have to go back to where I was before. And if things turn out okay, then I will have executed an interesting and worthwhile experiment. And I did that year without alcohol, and I have never looked back. I did not realize what a negative impact alcohol was having on my life. And it was only once I probably got about 3 or 4 months in that information started to become clear to me. And I really, but by the end of my year's experiment, I knew I wasn't going to go back to drinking. I just felt so much better without it.
Now, did you have any trouble along the way, like seeing that your behavior could escalate from what it was to more serious behaviors?
Yes, yeah, certainly. I think maybe I'm trying to blame somebody else, but hear me out for a second. I think I had in the back of my mind that for me to be in a position of saying I'm not going to drink anymore, I needed to have a big story about, losing my driving license, or losing my job, blowing up my relationship, or something going dreadfully, dreadfully wrong that was then going to be the reason. That's why I had to stop drinking. And rather than a massive rock bottom, I think what I could see was the potential for a rock bottom. And what I was doing was actually bouncing along, knowing it could happen, but just keeping myself slightly back from it. And so the point at which I said, right, I'm going to do this year-long experiment, I very easily could have ended up in a situation where rehab was a route I might have had to go down at some other point along the line, or where my family might have decided they were going to intervene, or my decision might have been slightly taken out of my own hands more. So the point at which I said, okay, that's it, I'm going to do this for a year, it felt strangely powerful. Being able to make the decision myself and say, okay, this is in my hands. I am going to choose which path I take now. I recognise I was so fortunate to be in that position. Looking back, I think maybe I should think about patting past me on the back and saying, well done. Like if I could do that, I would say, that was a good choice at that moment. And it felt a frightening choice to make, but I'm so glad, so glad that I did.
And I'm so glad that you brought up the point that, it's not a requirement that you lose everything before you get help.
Yes. Yeah.
And a lot of people that we see with our recovery residents called the Lodge at Delray Beach, are people that this really is the last house on the last block for a lot of them. They've been in multiple treatment centers, lost cars, or not really lost them. They gave away property due to the addiction.
Yeah.
And I think that it's so important that you were able to do that on your own. Did at any time you think that you might have been an alcoholic? Were you worried?
Yes, definitely. The phrase that is my standout one that became a point of worry for me was the phrase, right, that's it, I'm never drinking again, which would be when I had a ginormous hangover. Or it might have been right at the end of an evening, or it would be the next morning. And where I started to worry myself was when I was saying that, absolutely knowing for sure it wasn't true. I'm never drinking again, but that only ever meant until 5 o'clock that evening. Yeah, yeah.
Well, and then I think what's important too about this is that you don't have to go all the way to the floor of the basement, hitting rock bottom, before you're doing damage to your relationships. Absolutely. Right? If you are going home every day and you're going for the wine before you even take your coat off, in an hour or an hour and a half, you're not going to be really present for your spouse or your children.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that moment of realizing for me came, I remember it was a Friday night, and I remember it was 9 o'clock. I had just sat down on the sofa, and I was drinking a glass of wine, maybe my third or fourth glass of wine of the evening, I don't know. My husband had sat down next to me, and the boys had sort of come into the room. My husband and I were about to put something on the television. The boys were kind of in the room and then out of the room, and I don't know, playing a game or bundling around, doing whatever small boys do. And I had this realization that everything in this house, everything that surrounds me right now, is everything I ever dreamed of. Here I am living in an amazing country, in just on the outskirts of a beautiful town, surrounded by amazing countryside, my lovely husband, these 2 kids, had a job I really enjoyed, and my dog. And I had this sudden moment of panic that if this is everything I ever dreamed of, why am I here with this drink, numbing myself away from it? I am emotionally not in this room. Physically, I'm here, but nobody is having a part of me. I am entirely by myself in my head. And on that Friday night, that was another one of those very steady, hard steps on my way towards this isn't okay anymore. This does need to be different. And I think it's a really easy part not to look at in our lives, because socially, what I wasn't doing anything wrong.
No.
Society would say all I was doing right there was sitting on my sofa, drinking a glass,
enjoying a cocktail.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, in the United States, we have a show called Blue Bloods with Tom Selleck.
Okay.
And every Sunday they sit around. So every episode, it's a Sunday night, and they're sitting around the family dinner table. Well, everybody's got wine.
Yeah.
And then when they're talking about something serious, because Tom Selleck plays the police commissioner, and his kids are all either cops or lawyers.
Right.
And when he's talking with them about something serious, it's bourbon.
Right.
When they're over going to getting ready to arrest a perpetrator, it's almost always in the bar. So even in our situation comedies or dramas on television, it's so ingrained in our culture that if you tell people, like I started a social experiment on myself too, so I can really appreciate the hard work and dedication that takes, and the stamina to keep going the course.
Mm.
You know, even if you feel shaky, just keep working towards the goal. Mine was, I was born ill, and I've fought for my life for most of my adult life from 23 on, and I'm 51 now. And I had a softball fall that exposed that I had a divided pancreas. So I've had many hospitalizations and just a train wreck of a medical history. But it taught me a different perspective on how to recover as well. I'm not in recovery from alcohol or drugs, but I've recovered 1,000 times from physical. And I think that there's a lot of parallels in there. It's scary when you start something like that. You don't know what the outcome is going to be. There's a lot of trepidation involved. Did you experience a lot of that?
Yes, I did. And actually, that what you've just said it really reminded me when I went into deciding I was going to do this year without alcohol, I did call it an experiment. Because I think that kind of language allowed me to move towards it with a curiosity and an open mind and trial and error set of ideas. I thought about various different words that it might have been. It could have been my, or my long quest, or a form. I suppose those kinds of words to me sound a bit more masculine, and the
Right.
experiment just sounded a bit more light. And I think once I had started to read various books, listen to podcasts, recognize that, guess what? Plenty of people in the world live without having a drink. Once I was exposed to all of the good things that could be on the other side of this, it felt so much more
Yeah.
comfortable, and possible, and then probable. And I think what I hadn't realized in the beginning, because I didn't know I could look for them, were the idea of other people having trod this path before, the idea that there was community, there was support. I'd been closed off to all of those ideas. There's a big, I don't know if it's the same over there, but here, so many of our greetings cards have got the fizz and the champagne and the gin on the front of the cards. We have a huge, really popular books here that are called Hurrah for Gin and Why Mummy Drinks and Why Mummy Loves Wine. There's loads of
Really?
Yes, loads of fridge magnets, kitchen signs and stuff that say things like, oh, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, or
right.
it's wine o'clock, or all of this stuff, which is supposed to be funny. And don't get me wrong, I haven't ever had a sense of humor bypass. But now I think to myself, in all of those years before, with the small children, with the working hard, with everything else that was going on in my life, it shouldn't have been hurrah for gin and mummy needs a glass of wine. It would have been so much better if, as a society, we could look at each other and go, do you need a cuddle? Do you need someone to do your vacuuming for you? Do you need a lasagna brought round? Like, these are the things
Practical
that help
things.
each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the wine. That actually isn't helpful. It's the opposite. Yeah.
Well, I think that's really interesting, that why mummy drinks, and it shows where we are as a culture and how much alcohol has gotten into it. I don't drink for health reasons, and people will not leave it alone. And now, I mean, once they find out I've had pancreas attacks just from having a divided pancreas, and then if you drink on top of that, you're more likely to have more attacks. So the pain was so horrendous that was a big enough motivator for me. What would you say to somebody who's who's in your same shoes that you were in and is drinking a little bit more than they want to, and that they're finding that they're not being present when they are drinking. They can't be present for their family.
Yeah. I know that my way to recovery was through harm reduction. So I think my advice and my loving words would be around cutting back if stopping immediately felt like too high a bar to go for in the first place. I know that I kept myself stuck for quite a while because I wasn't prepared to go down that route of I'm never drinking again. That I stayed too long drinking because it felt like too much to expect myself to never have another drink ever again. So
that's an important point, because a lot of people have that same thought. I'm never going to be able to drink again. What am I going to do at my children's wedding? What am I going to toast with? Because like you said, in all things, all the marketing and the it show the greeting cards, they, St. Patrick's Day, you have lots of mugs of beer on the front of cards with the beer green,
Yeah. I think if we were to say, right, I can't do anything about it today because it's St. Patrick's Day next month, and the month after is a 40th birthday, and the month after is a wedding, and then there will never ever be the right moment. It just isn't going to happen. There isn't going to be that gap in your diary where nothing is happening for a super extended amount of time. We all have our different relationships with alcohol. Not only did I enjoy drinking socially, but absolutely I was an at-home drinker as well, and a binge drinker in some situations and a moderate drinker in other situations, all the different ways. So I would say not to go looking so far ahead in your diary. I would say make the decisions for today, for this week. Every single drink less that you have is better for your physical, emotional, your spiritual well-being. I definitely, I think it's easier to point to the physical benefits as a first line of what is good, because it's really easy to recognize when we're sleeping so much better. It's really easy to recognize.
And that comes back fairly quickly.
Yeah, quick. Yeah. So I would say for me, it was the emotional benefits that came in as a secondary line, and that was that I hadn't really recognized the sort of low level anxiety, the brain fog that I had as being around the drinking. I was blaming other things for that. And I would say that spiritually, I probably just felt a bit numb. And actually having that clarity of mind that has come through choosing not to drink has really made me just feel more open-minded, more open-hearted. I think that thing about connection is entirely true, that being able to forge deeper and more meaningful relationships, friendships, meeting new people through recovery, that is a gift that I had no idea was to come. I didn't know it was a possibility.
I didn't know it existed. I met my husband in church in 2006. And in 2008, we opened the first lodge at Delray Beach with a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house with 6 men. We quickly grew to 60 within 10 houses, 5 men's and 5 women's. We had a staff. But it's now we're turning our focus to the people that are at home in a program called Recovery Comes Home, because 80% of the people that go to treatment go back home after treatment. And you've only had 30 days of education
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks of which you're not even really cognizant because
Yeah.
you're foggy and you need to get clarity.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think the hurdles that everyone is facing today are overwhelming. Our stress level is up since COVID, and that was another huge problem, was that all of a sudden we went from having no liquor sales in some states on Sunday to the next day the policy decision was made to keep the alcohol flowing so that people wouldn't go into alcohol withdrawal and be in the hospitals in the beds that were needed for COVID patients.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was a policy decision to make it an essential business.
Yeah.
Because could you imagine if Sunday you go to sleep at night and Monday morning you wake up and there's no alcohol anywhere?
No.
And you guys have you don't have it as bad as we have it in the US, where there's gallons of wine at Walgreens, which is a drugstore.
Right. No, not in, no, it wouldn't be in our pharmacies. No, no.
So that's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Combining things and combining drugs. So how did you transition into the work you do now?
So I set up my business just over 2 years ago. And when I set my business up, I was still working in my full-time job. So now, as a recovery coach, this has been my sole focus for just over a year. My previous job was working in youth justice and youth offending.
Yes.
So I spent 12 years as a youth worker, and a massive part of my role was talking to my young people, the people I was working with, about their substance use and misuse. And all through that period, it had never occurred to me to observe, to look at what kind of relationship I had with alcohol myself. And so all of the work that I had done around drugs and alcohol with the young people, suddenly it was all crystallizing in my head, I suppose, in 2019, when I thought to myself, some of the stuff that I'm saying to these young people
Yes.
sounds really good. And could I possibly consider taking some of my own advice here? And so that was part of what led me to deciding that I was going to stop drinking myself. I then trained as a recovery coach professional. I did various different trainings around alcohol use, and my coach training as well. So I major in one-to-one relationships. I don't currently do any group coaching in my own business, but I do work freelance for a charity and also a community interest company, looking after their clients as well. And all of my work has been on, or most of my work has been on Zoom, has been online. So I have just enjoyed so much being around the world, that as soon as we're on Zoom, we don't have to be in the same town as somebody. And it's been a total joy, having an international business from the get-go. So interesting. Aren't we lucky that we get
We
to have
are.
these
Well,
conversations?
and that was one of the things that I thought the pandemic did for all of us together at the same time. We all grew up on Zoom together, learned how to use it, learned how to, raise our hand, learned how to share our screen, learned that we could actually do healing modalities through the airwaves. One of the things, I'm a big one-on-one person myself, in person, right, in real life. And I was skeptical about whether a real connection, because I feel people's vibrations, how could I find that through a box with us talking to each other like Hollywood squares? And it absolutely does happen. The connections are real and genuine. And I've met just some of the most beautiful souls through this crisis. you know, and because I was ill, growing up, I spent a lot of time in the hospital by myself. So I was used to isolation. And like, you're obviously too, I mean, I can see you're just a bubbly personality and just a really big, good-hearted soul. And you love the work you're doing. It shows.
Yes, yeah. I think that if I could have known then what I know now about other people in this field of work, in this community, in recovery, I needn't have been so afraid. But
Right.
but you can only know what you know in a moment, can't
That's
you?
right. That's
That
right.
is the whole point of where you are then and where you are now. That whole idea, the thing that endlessly went through my head was, if I'm not going to drink, I will be lonely, miserable, and boring. That was honestly what I thought.
Yes, absolutely. That's a
Was on
big
the
thing that
other
we
side.
come into that all the time, is that how, especially average age coming out of treatment is 24, which
Mhm.
is not what 24 used to be.
No.
And they're thinking to themselves, what am I going to do if I can't have another drink for the rest of my life?
Yes. Yeah.
They can't even fathom not
No.
drinking 2 days from now
Of course.
in
Yeah.
the beginning, you know. And for, you know, I want people to know that you were able to do this on your own.
Yeah.
And not everybody is in that same kind of situation. There's some people that are in kind of you're in the green zone where you could do some self-regulation and self-help, and
Yeah.
plenty of people are in that yellow zone
Yeah.
where they need some outside support, but it's usually like a support group of friends, family, other people in recovery, that kind of thing. It's not until it gets to the red level where you can't stop on your own. It's just
Yeah.
not, you know, you've tried. We tell people all the time, because it says that in the big book, if you're not convinced, like we can convince nobody that they have a problem. They
Mhm.
have to self-identify,
Yes.
especially if they want to get help and have it be successful. But we can say, gosh, ask yourself some of these questions and
Mhm.
see how you respond. And then if you still don't think you belong with us, go out and try some more investigation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go out, you know, see if you can only keep it to the weekend. See if you can, um, after 5 o'clock only. You
Mhm.
know, people tell themselves all the time, I don't drink every day, or I don't, you know, I still pay my bills. I put a roof over the house.
Yeah.
What's the big deal?
Mhm.
And so I'd ask you, if if you could go back and talk to a woman that was in your shoes,
Mhm.
who's just saying, oh, come on, Sarah, we all have to have something to, this life is hard, right? We all have to have something to decompress. What's wrong with a glass of wine or 2 glasses of wine every night?
Mhm. Mhm. All of those things were said to me, all of those things and more. Of course they were, along with, you know, you're no worse than the rest of us. You know, you can just have one or two, you know, all of those things. What I would say to me back then would be essentially one word, and the one word would be trust. Trust. And I would love to be able to go back to that body, that person, me then, and put my hands on my own heart and say, you only need to listen to you. Like, all of those things that you're hearing from other people might be their truths, might be their realities, might be how they feel,
Mhm,
but you know this
mhm.
isn't good enough for you. And all of the worry, all of those answers to the questions like, do I have a problem? Is this going to get worse? I would say, don't worry about any of the
Any
answers
of
to
that,
any of that.
yeah.
You know right now this is
Mhm.
not good enough. the only way you are going to know for sure whether things can be different is to take this, what felt like huge, bold leap. You've got to take the action. You've got to stop doing that thing, test drive it, do the experiment. And what was absolutely essential was trust in myself.
Yes.
And it's hard to trust in yourself if you haven't got a whole catalogue of evidence as to why you should trust yourself.
And tools, you don't have tools in the toolbox yet either.
Absolutely that. It was blind faith, I would say, that took me, to the point of being able to say, okay, I know that if I bet on myself, if I'm prepared to make this decision, do this thing, I will be having to pull in the resources. I could see I couldn't rely on my friends at that point because of all of exactly those sentences you just said.
Yes, I was going to ask you that about, did you get pushback from your friends and family?
Yes, absolutely. And I dealt with the different people and the different things that they said in different ways at different times. So there were times when I told white lies, and I did say I was on antibiotics when I wasn't, where I did say I had to drive when I didn't, where I did say, in the UK, our socially acceptable reasons for not drinking are antibiotics, driving, or being pregnant. And my ship had sailed on the being pregnant one, so I was down to two. and actually, I suppose the other one is if you were training for, I don't know, running a marathon or something, but I didn't want anyone to ever ask me to run a marathon, so I wasn't going down that route.
Wasn't going down the route.
No,
we have what we developed as the ABCs of recovery, and I think it's important that it's kind of along the same lines as the things you've been mentioning here. Accept your situation and prioritize action. That's the A. And then be brave enough to start over and over and over until you get there. Yes. And the C is create a stellar support system, starting with the higher power.
Love it. Yeah.
And brilliant. I think with those things, you can get through and muddle through those early days, and then one day becomes two, becomes a couple of months, becomes a couple of years. And look at you now, you've made a profession out of it.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, if I could go back in time and tell that person then that this would be now, that would have been the most incredible news story, let me tell you. Yeah.
And the good news is it's the responsibility is yours, but that's also the bad news, right? But it's good news because you can change your situation. We're finding out, with neurodiversity, we're finding out that what we thought this is just how I am. This is how I was born. I'm part of an Irish family, so we're drinkers.
Yeah.
But you can change neural pathways and make anything that you want to make. And I'm so proud of you for all that you've accomplished, and really, really wish you a lot of success with your recovery coaching. And I'm so happy you took time today to share with us. It's been an honor having you, Sarah.
Thank you. What a joy. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, we're about out of time for today, but we will see you on another episode of Recovery Comes Home Radio. Everybody stay safe out there. Thank you for tuning in to Recovery Comes Home Radio. We hope that today's episode has provided you with valuable information and insights on the recovery process. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. Keep seeking support, practicing self-care, and moving forward one step at a time. Until next time, stay strong, stay resilient, and stay humble. Hope lives here.